Welcome back to Wellness Wednesdays. I'm Katie Hovatter with Inner Evolution Counseling. This week, we're going to be discussing setting boundaries. I know this is something that I have struggled with, especially around the holidays and family. There are many different kinds of boundaries. There are physical, sexual, intellectual, emotional, material, and time boundaries, and they're all set by our needs, our emotions, and our capabilities in that time. This means that sometimes I might have the time or energy or emotional capacity to do something for someone, but other times I may not, making my boundaries fluid. I want to say that again. Boundaries are fluid. That means that each person sets their own boundary, but those boundaries might change based on circumstances. Most people have a mix of different boundary types. Somebody could have really healthy boundaries at work, but then really porous boundaries in romantic relationships, or rigid boundaries, or a mix of all three with family or friends. One size does not fit all. And so, what does that have to do with self-care? Well, first, ask yourself about what kind of boundaries that you have. Are you the kind of person who never asks for help? Do you always keep other people at a distance? Do you maybe overshare your thoughts and feelings all the time? Are you able to communicate your personal wants and needs in a healthy way? Are you able to say no to somebody when they ask for something? Or do you feel guilty for saying no? Are you really dependent on the opinions of other people to the detriment of your own? Do you refuse to compromise your values for other people? Do you share personal information in an appropriate way, maybe not oversharing? Do you keep everyone at a distance to avoid the possibility of rejection? These are all common traits of porous, rigid, and healthy boundaries, and everyone has a little mix of all three all the time. And so all of this boundary stuff can be really a lot more stressful around the holidays, which come with a lot of expectations about seeing people that we love. Sometimes, for people with porous boundaries, this can be exceptionally overwhelming. Porous boundaries are what happen when we are afraid of what will happen if we say no to people. Sometimes we are over-involved in other people's problems and overly dependent on the opinions of our friends and family, and that can make us accepting of situations that can be considered abusive or disrespectful. Think about it. How many times have you heard you have to be around them on the holidays? Their family. Even if it's like the stereotypical drunk uncle, or what if it's the abusive grandparent or the abusive parent, someone who was always verbally putting you down, neglectful of your emotional needs, dismissive of your emotional needs, but we're just supposed to forgive them because they're our parents, it's our family. When we wouldn't put up with those kinds of behaviors from friends or from coworkers, or possibly even from romantic partners. Setting those boundaries and saying no to those people is absolutely okay. Stop and think for a minute. If I say no to that Christmas dinner with that relative or parent or friend who really makes me feel bad about myself, who I'm stressed at the thought of just being around, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? I would argue the worst thing that's going to happen is that person will be disappointed. Their feelings will be a little bit hurt. But you know what? That's okay. Sometimes we have to live with disappointments, right? This can also be especially difficult if you've got rigid boundaries. When our boundaries are rigid, we avoid intimacy in close relationships, and we are very deeply protective of our personal information, and we are not likely to ask for help even when it's clear that we need it. And we tend to keep others at a distance to avoid being hurt. So if you've already got really rigid boundaries, maybe you want to practice loosening them up a little bit, and maybe say yes to that holiday party. Say yes to wrapping presents with somebody. Say yes to making Christmas cookies if that's what you do, and try to open those boundaries a little bit and let some people in, especially if those people make you feel safe and make you feel loved. If you let them in a little bit more, you might find you enjoy the holidays that much more because you aren't alone, especially if you don't want to be alone. But then the appropriateness of your boundaries also depends on the setting. What's appropriate to say when you're with friends might not be appropriate to say when you're at work, and it might be especially difficult to talk about with family. So you really want to be careful, and sometimes we need to keep those rigid boundaries because of the setting that we're in. And I think there's nothing wrong with saying no to going to the company Christmas party if you really don't want to go to the company Christmas party. There's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. You might have other things going on, or you might just not have the emotional space to be at the company Christmas party this year. That's okay. The important thing here is to give yourself the space to really stop before you make commitments and think about, what can you do? What do you have time for? What do you have emotional capability to handle? Maybe you don't have as much money this holiday season and you don't want to do all of the big Christmas stuff that maybe it's a tradition in your family to do. And what if you just really can't handle the idea of hugging those relatives that you only see once a year? It's okay to say no to things that don't fit with your schedule, with your time, and with your emotional and physical needs. It's especially important that we allow our children the space to not have to hug or give physical contact to relatives that they don't feel comfortable doing so. If you're going to be around kids, you should definitely ask them, hey, can I give you a hug? And if they say yes and hug you, great. And if they say no, they don't want to hug right now, tell them that's okay. Make sure the kid understands they don't have to hug you if they don't want to. This helps teach our children how to set up healthy boundaries and be able to say no to things and give them bodily autonomy. And we really want to make sure we are teaching our kids these healthy physical boundaries, and we're respecting these boundaries, not just for our kids, but for ourselves too. It's okay to not hug people, especially in this post-pandemic world. Maybe you don't want to hug people as much as you did before COVID hit. And if you're feeling sick and you don't want to be around somebody, that's okay. And if someone has young children and they say, hey, if you have a little bit of a cold, please don't come, try not to get too upset with them for that. They're setting boundaries for themselves and their children, and those are boundaries that work for them. It isn't personal. It's just about comfort level. And I think that's the biggest part of boundary setting that we struggle with, is where are our personal boundaries? Do they move sometimes? Absolutely. And so we really want to make sure that when they do move, we're voicing that in a healthy way and an effective communication way. So I really want us to think this week for self-care about what our boundaries are, where they are, and it's okay if they have to move. It's okay if they have to change. The holidays are stressful enough without worrying about pleasing everyone around us. Because you know what? You can't please everybody 100% of the time. What you can do is keep yourself and your loved ones healthy and keep yourself and your loved ones safe. And that is really important. And that's what healthy boundaries are all about, is being able to have your own opinion, have that opinion respected. And if the worst thing you do is disappoint someone because you don't come over for a holiday dinner, well, you know what? There's always next year or the next holiday. We can always reschedule. Time with family and friends and loved ones are very important in the holiday season, especially because it's cold. There's so much more darkness with the sun going down so early. But you should never sacrifice your own well-being for the well-being of somebody else. And I think that is the most important thing about setting boundaries. So let's just take a minute and practice that for a second, just in your own head. Think about what it would feel like to say no to that occasion with that person that makes you feel really stressed out, and saying, you know what, I really can't make that. I had to do this the other day. I had to say no to a birthday party for one of my nephews because we just couldn't fit it into our schedule. And I let my sister know we couldn't make it. And she said, that's okay. I understand. We'll see you next time. And I was so afraid to have that conversation with my sister because I was so afraid of disappointing her and not being there for my nephews. But you know what? They were okay with it. They know that we love them. They know that we care. And in the end, it kept everyone healthy and happy and safe. And that is the most important thing this time of year. Thanks for listening. We'll have no video next week. Please enjoy your holidays, and we'll see you in the new year.